difference, one cup at a time. Tea time. So be sure to grab your tea, grab a seat, and tune in to Miss Liz. Tea time, making a difference, one cup at a time. Tea time, yeah. Tea time, time.
Well, good morning and welcome to Tea Time. That's right, we're back and we're back for a new month. We're in the month of June and today is June 1st, 2023. We're already 6 months into 2023. Who knew, right? So this morning we do have a hard topic. So trigger warnings will be put on during the show. I will not be offended if you cannot tune in because it is going to be a hard topic. I myself am pulling myself together because, as everyone knows, I lost my beautiful little girl Ashley in 1988. So we're going to be talking about miscarriages and premature and child loss. So we're going to be talking about a lot of hard, heavy topics. But we have the incredible Michelle Valiukenas joining us. She is the founder of the Colette Louise Tezel Foundation. And we're going to talk about all the incredible work that this woman does through the loss of her beautiful daughter, Colette Louise. So we're going to do the disclaimer. We're going to get some bio on Michelle, and then we're going to get Michelle to come in here, and we're going to spill a strong TEA this morning with all of you guys. So grab your tea, grab your coffee. Make sure to grab your breakfast. We all need our breakfast. And enjoy the show. Disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live shows. Miss Liz myself is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment, please grant StreamYard permission to see your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that the content brought forward for any Tea Time show hosted by myself, Miss Liz, is always brought forward in good faith. However, may bring forth dialogue and opinions that are not representative of my platform. The facts and information are perceived to be accurate at the giving time of airing. All Tea Time guests and audience participants are responsible for using their good judgment in taking any action that may relate to the discussion. The content brought forward may include discussion for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It is significant to note that the show is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection and is not providing therapeutical advice. If you have any questions about the disclaimer or the panelist discussion, you may freely contact me, Miss Liz, through my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. Moving forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in today's show in any aspect, I myself, Miss Liz, welcomes you. And should you decide that this show is not made for you at this time, I respect your wishes and will see you at a later show at a later dating time. And again, all tea times this year in 2023 are done on Thursday, unless it's a rescheduled tea time, which will be a Monday or a Tuesday. So let me give you a little bit on Michelle. Good old technology here. We got something to shut us down. Michelle Valiukenas is the proud mom of her angel sweet pea, who she lost due to miscarriage, her angel daughter Colette Louise, who she lost at 9 days old, and her only living child, her rainbow baby Elliot Miguel. Inspired by the journey with Colette, Michelle and her husband founded the Colette Louise Tezel Foundation, whose mission is to improve outcome of pregnancy, childbirth, prematurity, and infancy, as well as aid in the grieving process through financial assistance, education, and advocacy. Their flagship program financially assists families dealing with high risk and complicated pregnancies, NICU stays, and loss. The organization's ability to help families rely on donations and grants, and they are grateful if you are able to donate. Michelle also participates and advocates on issues of maternity health, maternity mortality, infant health and safety, and pregnancy complications. Michelle lives in Glenview, Illinois, with her son Elliot and husband Mark and her dog Nemo. So let me get Michelle in here, and then we're going to spill you a good strong tea and some good awareness on such a hard topic. So welcome, Michelle.
Hi, thank you
So,
for having me.
so Michelle, before we get started on Colette Louise,
Mhm.
give me a little bit on who Michelle is.
Yeah, okay. Um, Typical mom, I was like, wait, I have to talk about myself? Hold on. So I am 41. I'm married to an amazing man. We'll be married 7 years in August. And I am sort of, I call myself kind of a recovering attorney. So I am an attorney by profession, and I worked for about a decade, primarily helping domestic violence victims and sexual assault victims. And I love that, and transitioned a little bit out of practice, but still in the field. And when everything happened with my daughter, Colette, I just found myself not having the same desire to go back into that work, and really felt like I had a different mission and a different push, and that being a mom was pushing me somewhere else. And that's when, I left and I started everything. Um, and I love being a mom. I have an almost 3-year-old. He will be 3 next month, and he is just amazing, and just totally, um, everything I wanted in being a mom, and everything I visioned in being a mom, right? Um, and that comes with all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
It's wonderful, and it's amazing, and it's joyful, and I'm so grateful. And I also grieve that this is my only living child, and I grieve that I don't get to be a girl mom in the way that I thought I would be, and I grieve that he will not have a sibling in the traditional sense, like other friends will. And, so I think just all of that. But, these days, I love being a mom to all of my kids, and, and trying to do this. And so I think that's really my first goal. And I've always seen the work as the foundation is just my way of parenting Colette. So not at all like I expected, but it's a different form, and it's still me being a mom. And I love doing it. And when I have some free time, love to, I love TV and movies. I love to knit. I love reading. And when I get a chance to do any of that in my free time, then that's always great. So, but most of the time, it's being a mom, and that's kind of what my life is.
I like that you you put this free time, right? Because when you
Right.
start a foundation, it's no longer free time, right?
No,
It's
no, no. So yeah, for sure.
so Michelle, your daughter passed at 9 days. So do you want to walk us through the process? Like, was it a complicated pregnancy? Like,
Sure.
were you
Yeah,
aware of
yeah.
that?
So, I'll actually just briefly start. Like, my husband and I, so we got married when we were a little bit older, and so we started trying right away, and had no reason to suspect that we would have any difficulties getting pregnant. We were both pretty healthy people. There was no issues, and what we found was we ended up with a diagnosis of infertility and unknown infertility. So no real reason why. There were a couple things here and there, it was like, oh, well, you could maybe improve your numbers here, you could maybe improve your numbers here, but nothing concrete that would say this is the cause, and so let's fix it. So we went through fertility treatments that didn't work, and finally went to IVF. So we have only ever conceived through IVF. And I got pregnant my first round, and we were thrilled and shouted from the rooftop. And that was our sweet pea, who we lost at about 7.5 weeks of pregnancy. And that was in May of 2017. And, just really no real answer, no real known cause. The best thing they could tell us was that, if you genetically test embryos, hopefully this won't happen again. And so we tried again, and that did not take. And then we ended up switching doctors and practices. And on our third round, we got pregnant with our daughter, Colette. And it was a pretty normal pregnancy. I was considered high risk because of my age and having had a loss. But otherwise, it was a pretty normal pregnancy. I think morning sickness is like the worst named thing in the world. I don't think I've ever found anything that's more poorly named, because I was sick all the time, all day. But, other than that, I was pretty, doing pretty well. And when I was 21 weeks pregnant, I went to a standard OB appointment, and my blood pressure was 188 over 110. And just to give a perspective, like the ideal is 120 over 80. So I had, completely passed that up. And, they tried several times. They let me rest. They had taken it right when they had walked me through the doctor's office. They were like, maybe that's what it is. So, let's have a moment. And my OB told me to go over to labor and delivery. And when I went over, what we found is actually, so on the way, my husband and I were joking, saying, it's so crazy. This would be the kind of thing that would happen to us, that we're going to go and my blood pressure is going to be totally normal. It's just going to be some fluke, because we hadn't heard a heartbeat. We hadn't done anything. So we're going to go over there and they're going to like laugh at us, right? Like, we're going to be the big joke of this hospital. That was not the case. And so my blood pressure had not lowered, and in fact had risen slightly. And so a lot of stuff happened very, very quickly, and, a lot of in and out of doctors. And they said, well, we're going to admit you. And nobody really said what that meant. And the only thing I remember the doctors talking about was a 24-hour urine test. And so in my book, I thought, oh, they're admitting me because they have to do this urine test for 24 hours. And so it's easier to have me just be here and do this. So I was staying one night, maybe 2 nights, and that was it. And so we had an evening appointment with our OB. And so we had gone from work to the appointment and to the hospital. And so it was probably midnight. And my husband finally said, our poor dog has not been out since early this morning. I'm going to go home and let him out, and I'll get you some things. And while he was gone, my OB's partner, who was on call, came in and said, has anyone explained to you what's going on? And I said, no. And she said, you have a diagnosis of severe preeclampsia, and you will be here until you deliver. And that was the evening of May 8th. I was not due until September 7th. I mean, just completely dropped this bomb on us and our lives. And so, she said, do you have any questions? And I remember saying to her, I have a million questions and I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
And, I messaged my husband and I was like, yeah, so this is like apparently really serious, and we should, do this. And his response back to me was, you're joking, right? And I said, I'm not that creative. There's no way I could come up with this story. And so, very quickly, from one day to the next, I had come from work. My desk was a mess. I had all this stuff, I fully intended to be back at work the next day with no problems. And then to find out that I wasn't going to be back at work the next day. And I didn't know if I was going back to work, when I was going back to work, what this was looking like, with no planning, no anything. And so, it was a lot of stuff that was kind of thrown at us at one time. And, I thought about everything, right? I mean, the super serious of like, am I going to survive this? Is my baby going to survive this? To the mundane of like, we don't have a car seat. Oh my God, we don't have a car seat. We don't have a crib, right? Which now seems so ridiculous to have thought of. And then everything in between. Like, how am I going to work? How am I going to I managed a team. How was I going to do that? I worked for a nonprofit. We had grant reports due, and grant applications. How was I going to do that? Like all of those things floated through my mind. And so it's very scary, right? And medical stuff is always kind of scary, and doctors come in, and not every doctor has the greatest bedside manner. So they're telling you a lot of facts and numbers and survival rates. And, if you make it to week this and week that, and if you don't make it to week, then we won't intervene. And you're being thrown with a lot of things. And, just trying to sort of keep your head up over, from underwater, and life goes on, right?
Yeah.
So like my job still was, needing me to tell them what was going on, and I still had to figure out how all this stuff that I wasn't going to be able to do in the way I thought was going to get done, and all of that. And really, it was in the hospital that the first thought of this organization, this nonprofit, came to me. And that was because a day or two later, when things had calmed down slightly, I really started thinking about one thing that I wasn't asking myself was about finances. I knew we would be okay, but we essentially lost my salary pretty quickly. I was fortunate I had a little bit of leave time, and I did use that. And then I was also fortunate that my job allowed me to be able to do some work from the hospital, and so I could stretch it out a little bit longer. But very quickly, we lost my salary, and that's not something that most people have prepared for. And, we were at week 21. We were not prepared for me to lose my salary. There was push to, do you want to go on a short-term disability? And I didn't, because I also was anticipating a child coming home and my recovery post-birth. So I didn't want to do that. And so there was a lot of things that are happening.
Yeah.
And I just kept thinking about how many families would really just be completely decimated by this sort of thing. And I recognized my privilege and my blessing that I wasn't. So ultimately, I was in the hospital a little over 3 weeks. So when I had first come in and done an ultrasound, I think the first full day I was in the hospital, they came and told us that Colette was measuring a little bit behind. So they said she's measuring about 2 weeks behind. The ultrasound is not a perfect system, so we usually are okay with up to a week behind, because we know it's not 100%, up to date. They're like, we're hoping with regulating your blood pressure and monitoring you that we will give her the chance to catch up in growth. And that was what it, was hopeful. And so our plan basically was, I was going to be there for as long as possible. I mean, we were hoping I was there until September, and that we would just wait until either she decided to announce herself, the blood pressure was not able to be controlled, and so it was risk to my health, or there was something else that told us. And so after 3 weeks, I did a repeat ultrasound, and what we found was that not only was there no catch-up, there had been no growth from the 3 weeks. So she was now measuring, I was at 24 weeks and 5 days, and she was measuring at probably about 20 weeks.
Wow.
Really size-wise. So they came in, and the doctors all recommended delivery. And they, basically under the premise of, there's more interventions we can do on the outside than we can do right now. And so we went ahead. So emergency C-section. They got her out very, very quickly, which I was very grateful for. They had told us, repeatedly, over and over again, leading up to, going into the room, she's not going to cry. She's too young. You guys need to be prepared for that. You're not going to hear her, and that doesn't mean anything. And they also cautioned us that if they could not intubate with the smallest tube they had available, there wasn't an intervention they could do. So that was a concern because of her small size. And, that's really scary, right? And not at all the way I pictured childbirth was going to be, right?
Yeah.
You think of what you've seen on TV in the movies, and, um, you know, baby comes out and baby is crying and all of that. And it was just, so it was very surreal to go through it. And we did not find out if Cleo was, we did not find out the sex of the baby until she was born, although I knew from like day one that I was having a girl. And they came out and they said, it's a girl. And they took her off. And all of a sudden, the room got quieted down while they're trying to sew me back up. And I heard this like tiny but like powerful squeak. And I remember I said, is that her? And they said, yeah. And then they said, she shouldn't be able to make that sound. And I was like, well, of course, it's my badass daughter who's going to,
Right.
high all of your expectations, right? Like, okay, no problem. And then the tube, it was actually the second to smallest tube, totally fit her and did it. And I just, for me, I was like, this is just evidence, right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
we're gonna have a struggle, but this is a fighter. And, and she was, and, I think in very many ways she still is. And went straight to the NICU. I had a very difficult rest of the surgery. They couldn't get my intestines back in. My epidural wore off. I actually started to feel them on my stomach. And so they put me under. And we had been cautioned that they were going to do everything they could to try to prevent putting me under because of the preeclampsia. There was a lot of risk to me if they did have to put me under. So they were definitely trying to delay it, and you could tell just by the activity in the room. Prior to that happening, my husband, we had waited a little bit, and then my husband had decided to go try to see her and had asked me, is that okay? And I had said yes. And so he told me he loved me and gave me a kiss. And when they said, we're going to put you under, my thoughts were, I'm not going to wake up from this. And I, and I was prepared to, that was in my book what I had to do. And so I was shocked when I woke up in recovery. Like I was sort of like, wait, hold on, and kind of that, like, you hear in movies like the pinching yourself, like this is real, right? This is happening.
Yeah.
And they took me back up to my room. My husband, who's usually very laid back, really put his foot down and said, you have to take her to see Colette. She cannot go to her room without seeing Colette. And so they wheeled me in the hospital bed, and I got to see Colette. And so anyone who has ever had a preemie or a baby who needed to go to NICU, there is nothing that prepares you for it. So my younger sister, who's 4 years younger than me, was preemie. So some of my earliest memories revolve around things related to the NICU. So I felt like I would be prepared. And when it's your own kid, nothing prepares you, right? Like it's just nothing. So Colette was a little over a pound. She was in an isolette. We were told it would be a while before we would be able to hold her. And, she looks tiny and she's hooked up to all these wires, and because she was born so early, her eyes had not opened yet. And so, it's just none of it is what you expected. And we just sort of, became our lives. It's like, revolving around going to the NICU every day. And so we settled into a pattern once I was released, that my husband went back to work and I was still home on leave. And so he would get up and he would leave for work early. And he would either stop in at the hospital on the way in, or he would call the nurses and ask how she had done. And then he would send me a text message and tell me. And usually just because I was moving slower, I was usually in the process of getting ready. When I didn't have to go, I had to go a lot of OB checks to make sure my blood pressure did not rise. And because postpartum preeclampsia is really serious too, and that's definitely never talked about. And so if I didn't have to go to the doctors, if I didn't have that, like I was just usually moving slowly, and then I would go to the hospital and I would be there most of the day until my husband came in from work, and then we would spend some time with her, and then usually we would leave and grab dinner and then head home. And that was our routine. And so that's what we did. And the morning of May 31st, my husband went to work, and then he called on his way in. And then he messaged me and he said, when I called to talk to the nurses, the nurse said, hold on, and went to find the doctor. And I knew that that was not good, right? That's, like, okay. So I got, ready really quickly, and I headed over to the hospital. And the rotations had changed. And so this doctor was apparently there the night Chloe was born, but had not been there since. So I had never met him. He had met my husband, but not me. And so he came and he said, are you Colette's mom? And I said, yes. And he said, okay. He's like, well, let's talk about some things. And I said, okay. And I said, okay, what's up? What's going on? And he said, let's go find just a room. And that was, just very aware of that, like that this is serious. And so he told me, and so we had known that this was a risk. The ventilator that they tend to put micropremies on is very powerful. It saves lives. It's an incredible invention, but it's really only meant for about 24 to 48 hours of usage to really just strengthen that, and then to go to another ventilator. Prolonged time on that ventilator can start to essentially shred the lungs. And they had tried countless times to get Colette onto the other ventilator, and her numbers would plummet. And so they would put her onto the original. And essentially what he explained to me was what we knew was a possibility always, although I don't think we fully understood it, was that this had finally wreaked havoc on her lungs. And we had to, we had to deal with that. And so, he said, we're going to do everything we can, and we're going to keep doing everything. It's not a crisis yet, but I think you should probably call your husband. And I said, okay. And the words death or dying or anything were never used. And so I think on some level, I was just in denial. And so I just kept thinking like, oh, this is just going to be one of those stories we tell, right? Of like, when the doctors thought, you were down for the count, like all of a sudden you pulled through, and haha, and I'm imagining in my head telling the story at, her wedding and all of that. And he told me, you can stay in this room for as long as you want. And he said, okay. And then, he turned to leave, and he got to the door, and then he turned back and he said to me, do you believe in baptism? And I said, I do. And he said, then I think it's time. And for me, that was like a click. Like that was, and I wish that it had been told in a different way. And so I dialed my husband. As soon as he answered the phone, I started crying. But I still lived in denial. Like I still was in this denial. And it's like, this is just going to be one of those things, right? They're going to tell us all this down. This is what, and we're just it's going to go through. And so we spent a lot of time there. And in the meantime, my sister and my sister-in-law and my mother-in-law had come to the hospital already. And I stepped out at one point because my mother-in-law was there. There's only two people at a time who could be at the isolate. And I decided to give her some time with her granddaughter and my husband and her son. And I was in the family room with my sister and my sister-in-law. And my husband messaged me and said, do you want to come in? And there was a shift change. And so in our NICU, and this is pretty accurate for most US NICUs, they have a shift change, and during shift change, parents are not allowed in. They're allowed 24 hours a day, except during these shift changes. And so we were about maybe 10 minutes before a shift change. And so my husband messaged me to say, if you want to come in before shift change, let's do it now. And I was like, no, it's okay. I was like, listen, let's take a break from this. I think we could all use it, and we'll regroup, and then we'll come back after shift change. And he said, okay. And then I was still in there, and then all of a sudden a nurse came in and said, Mom, we need you in there. And they had cleared out everything, and they were letting us stay during shift change. And that was another one of those, like, oh, they're bending the rules. Like, this is what's happening. Still in denial. Still thinking, this is just going to make for a really good story one day when she's much older. And so, just spent a lot of time sitting right by her isolette, talking to her, really just trying to imagine and trying to, hoping, praying, whatever we could do and could think of. And then I could feel the doctor at one point started to turn to us and started to say something. And I don't know what he started to say, but I kind of knew in that moment that he was going to start to ask us to make some decisions. And I said in my head, I felt like I screamed it in my head. I do not know to this date if I actually screamed it out loud. But I said, Colette, please don't make me make this decision. And almost instantaneously, her numbers started to drop on their own. And so the doctor said, she's going. And I said, no, she's not. Oh my God, I tell this and I usually get through it without crying. And so the doctor said, what we can do is we can keep her alive. We can make sure she gets baptized. And we can bring her to a room and you guys can hold her. And hold her until she passes. And so that's what we did. And so, and they had broken every rule. I remember at one point while we were waiting for them to come to baptize her, I felt something on my shoulder. My husband was sitting next to me and holding my hand, and I felt something on my shoulder, and I realized my sister was behind me. And I thought, oh my God, they're breaking this rule, and they're allowing a third person in. And there was none of that, right? And, just all of that. And so they moved us to a family room, and by that point, my parents were there. My mother-in-law was there. My father-in-law passed many years ago. And our sisters and their husbands. And we got to hold her for the first time. And so Mark, my husband, and I held her and talked to her. And then everyone else got to, and then we got to hold her. And the doctor had come in twice. Because they need to find no heartbeat twice. And so he checked her and then told us. But even during then, right, when he didn't say much the first time. I think he was just trying to let us have those moments. But when he came in the second time, I was like, she's going to pull through. There's going to be some crazy miracle that happens, right? This is what's supposed to happen. These are the stories you hear of, like, and then everything's saved, right? And this is, what I thought. And when he told us she had passed, that was just, you think of these moments that'll bring you to your knees. And that's the worst one I can think of. Just to completely, something that's very against nature, right? You once you learn about death, you expect to bury your parents. You expect to, that when you get married, one of you is burying the other. Like, you expect all of that. That's circle of life. And not to say that grief and that pain, when that does happen, isn't there, but it's part of a circle of life, right? You're never, ever supposed to bury a child, right? And that's just, and then, there's a lot of decisions you have to make. And I remember at one point them coming in and talking, and they said, "Do you have a funeral home?" And I remember thinking, no, both my parents are alive. I've never planned anything. I don't have a funeral home. I was sitting by her bedside and I was thinking of things, because it never occurred to me she wasn't going to come home. So I was thinking of things like, if she comes home and she needs a wheelchair, we don't have a bedroom on the first floor. Could we make one of our rooms into a bedroom on the first floor? What would that look like? And I was thinking of, how it was going to look to have medical, doctor's visits all the time, and to manage a bunch of different doctors' visits. And I was thinking very much in that realm of things. And so I wasn't planning for funerals. I wasn't planning for any of that. And so, it's very quick decisions and very important decisions, and none of which any parent should have to make. And, it's just really, and I think, so we got to stay there in the room with her. Somebody from Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, which is another incredible nonprofit, came and took pictures of her. And she was in a very pretty angel gown that was made from a wedding dress. And, I mean, I have to say, if we had to do this, it was done in the most beautiful, most caring and supportive way that we could have ever imagined. Didn't make it any easier, but I'm always grateful that at least we had that time and that ability. And then it's surreal, right? You kind of just, you go home and you're just supposed to sort of live life, right? And in your world has completely stopped.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean everything else has stopped. And so, it's very, and I was also recovering from, a major C-section and trying to figure out, how that worked, and not being able to move at the same, pace and in the same way as I could. And, all of that. And so it's very overwhelming, and it feels like you are the only people who have ever experienced this. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm so transparent and I share so much about my story, is because if I make one person feel less isolated and less alone, it's all worth it. And, that's really what I want to do, because it feels like nobody has ever gone through this. Nobody ever will go through this. You're the only person. And you don't know what to do. You don't know up from down or left from right. And, your baby died. I mean, how is that a world in which you're supposed to live in?
Yeah.
And, I will say that I think, so I'm a planner. I'm the planner of the family, right? And so I'm kind of the one that, people can tell, and I'm like on top of it, and I'm managing all sorts of things. And I always have been. And for the first time ever, I found myself just unable to think of anything. The idea of giving her a memorial was sort of this abstract concept that I couldn't really wrap my mind around. And, I thank God for my sister, who showed up the next day and said, "Okay, I need you guys to get dressed. And then we need to go to the funeral home, and we need to go to the cemetery," and just basically drove us around and guided us and kind of pushed us into what we were doing. And so we had, a beautiful memorial for her. And, I think one thing about grief that's so interesting is I think we don't talk about grief. We don't talk about death. We don't talk about loss at all in this society. We definitely don't talk about it when it comes to children and babies. I mean, that's unheard of. We don't want to, no. But I think we know some of the protocols of what we're supposed to do, right? So it's easy to show up to the funeral, the memorial, right? Because it's a set thing, and we know that it is. So it's easy to show up to that. But when that's over with, a lot of times people don't know what to do, and so people just hide. And that was, definitely something we saw was less and less people come, in the weeks after, the months after. And I was really, struggling, right? I was a mom by every definition. I had given birth, but I didn't have a baby. And that maternal energy, those hormones, whatever you want to call it, didn't just go away. And I think that was really something. And so I really started thinking about this financial piece and how we could help, and really wasn't finding places that did it or did it in the way I thought would make the most sense. And so I started reaching out, and, I met with the social workers at the hospital I had delivered at. And, just was like, hey, do you think that this is a good idea if I start something? And, didn't really know what I would get in terms of reactions. And really, it was just, please do this. How can we make this happen? What do we have to do? And so somewhat reluctantly, I started this nonprofit. And I say somewhat reluctantly, I had worked in nonprofit pretty much my whole career. And when people would say things like, oh, you should start a nonprofit, oh, you should start a nonprofit, I would always swear up and down I never would. But all of a sudden in this, it felt like that's what the world, the universe, Colette was telling me to do. And so we launched. I kind of, turned all of my energy into that. I became probably a little obsessed with having it launch on Colette's due date, so September 7th of 2018. And we did. And our first thing was basically to provide financial assistance, and that financial assistance piece has stayed. And that's what we're most known for. And it's financial assistance in sort of what I see are the 3 stages of Colette's life, but also the 3 stages where I think, kind of all work together. And so the high-risk pregnancy, the pregnancy that develops some sort of complications or needs some sort of restrictions, NICU stay, or loss, and loss being everything from the earliest pregnancy loss all the way up to about 1 year of age. And, we started doing it, and, it was tough to just get the word out and to get people to really believe that we weren't scamming people or,
There's
that we
a
were
lot of that though, right, Michelle? Like where all these foundations are started, a lot of people right away, they assume that it's, there's a scam. There's,
Right.
we're not going to donate. We're not going to support. We're not going to help because it's just another one that's being built.
Right.
So it does take time. And I think by sharing your personal story, it also makes a difference, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And so we did a lot, but, one of the things I was doing was I just had created social media accounts, and I started just, sharing our story, sharing articles and information and facts that I had never known. And all of that was happening. And what I was finding was that not even the people I thought I was going to reach, but friends were saying, oh my God, I had a friend who had a miscarriage. And then I read about some of the things you said. And so I talked to her totally differently than I would have before.
Yeah.
People, just saying like, I didn't realize how often this was happening, and, all of that stuff. And so there was this like aha moment of, we need to be educating people about these things too, right? Like,
Yeah.
yes, the financial assistance piece is always going to be there, and that's always important. But part of, this is that we need to know that this is a problem and that this exists, right? And so when I was coming into it, sharing the story and thinking I was just trying to make other lost parents feel less alone, it was like, I also need to make all the people around them aware that this happens and that we need to do something about that. And so, really just think about it. And so we added in an education piece. And then I always say at my core, I am a storyteller and an activist. And so we also added advocacy. And I think that that's really important. I think we definitely need very big institutional changes in a lot of different ways. And I think, that's everything from having paid leave to better research so that we're not having all of these, babies going into NICU or, pregnant people ending up on bed rest or, babies dying or any of that. We're not having all of that. And so that was kind of what became our organization. I can say we are going to officially celebrate 5 years in September. We've helped over 1,800 families across the U.S. And given away more than $1 million in grants.
Yeah,
And
you guys have done some amazing work. I got some numbers here for the listeners out there. You've helped 1,804 families so far. You've reached over 47 states. Clients you've served is 6,694, and your financial grants is $1,325,383. That is amazing, Michelle. And I think it's because you had that background as well for nonprofits and grants and all of that this also helped you as well, right?
For sure. Yeah. No, definitely like my background helped. And really, I think, working with hospitals and really establishing partnerships, I think that's really important. Any of these issues are not going to be solved by just one person or one organization. They're just not. We have really big issues in the US when it comes to perinatal health, maternal mortality, infant health, infant mortality, loss, all of those things. But those are all big, huge problems, right? And it's going to take a lot of different people and a lot of different entities working together to solve those things. And, we are doing in the financial assistance realm, I know we are helping individual families, but we see it. There's so much need out there. There's so many families that are just, very much like we were, right? You're going along, you think things are good, you're planning a baby, at a certain date, and all of a sudden everything changes. Usually without any warning, maybe a slight warning, maybe.
Yeah.
And, you're supposed to sort of like just go with it. And, what I had thought of when I was first thinking of this was very much helping families so they could continue to afford their bills and that, kind of help. What I have learned is that unfortunately there are moms who feel like they have to choose between bed rest or hospitalization and work because one way they are putting their babies at risk and potentially their own health. And the other way is they might not be able to provide for their family. And especially if they have other children, they kind of have to prioritize. And that's, again, I mean, why is a parent having to make those choices with no support? And so we're, finding that and finding just, I think not only is it the loss of income that happens with any of these kinds of things, which is bound to happen, right? We lost my salary, but my husband lost some, luckily had a very supportive work environment. And so took some days and actually, my parents were in town and near us. And so one of the things we did while I was in the hospital was during the week, I would usually be by myself. My mother-in-law, who was retired at the time, would come, a couple times during the week, and other people would. And then on the weekends, a lot of times my husband was going into work and working, kind of getting that really good work in when he's not interrupted, because my parents could be with me. And that's how we were making it work. But that's not always possible. And there's so many things. And then your expenses go up, right?
Yeah.
And so, when we were in the hospital, we weren't cooking at home. And so that's an expense that goes up. Mileage, right? I think right now for a NICU, our average client is traveling 50 plus miles one way
Wow.
to visit their kids in NICU. And some people are traveling 200, 250 miles. So sometimes that might be a relocation, or that might be, they're coming in just on the weekends and, staying either at the hospital, or if there is a Ronald McDonald House, staying there or anything like that. And that's, an added expense. So not only are you losing that income, but then you're adding on expenses that were unforeseen, right? Nobody, expected to do it. And nobody expected to pay that, at the time, right? And so I think all of that has been really huge lessons learned of what we're doing. But the need is just, we went from being able to approve pretty much every application at the very beginning to now, we're approving maybe about half of every application every week. And, it's not for lack of us being creative or sometimes not always being fiscally responsible, because we know that we need, families need it, and they do. All of it, I think, is really really telling and really eye-opening to me. And I had the biggest vision for this, right? And I still am constantly amazed and shocked by what families are being put through.
Well, and we talked about this in the backstage before the show even went live. It's such a taboo. Nobody's talking about it. Why are we not talking about it? There are hundreds and thousands of people going through this each and every day. Right at this moment, there's someone going through this. So
Mhm.
why are we not talking about this? This is the question what we need to start asking everyone out there. Why are we not talking about grief? Why are we not talking about loss? It happens to all of us.
Right,
It's like you said, Michelle, if you haven't gone through it, somebody has gone through it, you
right.
know, and let's give people the option to share their stories and tell their stories so that we can understand. Just sharing a story actually educates us. It actually brings us the awareness that it could happen to us at any
Mhm.
time. You
Right,
know, we had a show last month where the terror strikes at any time. You know, we're all affected in some way.
mhm.
Through your loss, your parents have gone through a loss as well as
Right,
grandparents. We don't speak of those loss. And this is why we're here on Tea Time, is to bring the awareness, to educate, to advocate, and say, you know what, let's start talking. Let's start
right,
being comfortable with the hard topics. You know, let's
right.
hear the stories. So, Michelle, I really want to thank you, like, for sharing your story about Colette and the amazing foundation and the amazing work that you guys have done together, you and your
Thank you.
husband.
Thank you. Yeah.
Because
And we
what
do
else?
need to talk about it. Right? I think there's a couple things. First of all, every parent should be able to talk about every single one of their children,
Yep,
and should probably drive a few people insane over how much we talk about our children, right?
yep,
Living or not living. Um, A. B, it's happening. It's happening all over the place. I was amazed when we lost Colette, how many, we were getting tons of cards, or I was getting emails and things like that. And how many people were disclosing losses I had never known about. You know, I lost a baby at 28 weeks. I lost a baby at 20 weeks. I lost a baby at full term. I lost all of this stuff. And you go, well, why weren't you talking about this? Why didn't you make me aware
yeah,
of this? So at least I wouldn't have felt alone in those immediate moments. I would have been like, oh, it happened to other people. And I think that that's really powerful, and it's really true. And it doesn't, it crosses all classes and everything else. And, it can happen to anybody. And I think that
yeah,
that's really the, the powerful thing. And we need to get comfortable with it. And, I know sometimes I will say, I know it makes people uncomfortable that I talk about it, but it makes me uncomfortable that I live in a world that my daughter isn't in, right?
right.
That's uncomfortable, and I have to live in that. So, if you hear my story for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or if you stuck with me for an hour here, you were uncomfortable for that period of time. And I'm uncomfortable every day every moment of every day of my life. And like, that's the difference. And I think that that's really where we have to, recognize that and really sit in that feeling.
Yeah. Well, and nothing really grows, right, with comfort. If we
Right.
just stay in a comfortable world, nothing changes, nothing
Right.
grows, nothing, the awareness just stays in 1960. We're in 2023 and we're still not talking about child loss. We're still not
Right.
talking about these harder topics, and we all, mothers go out and get pregnant, and couples have babies and they just expect this baby's coming home. They don't
Mhm.
expect all of the things that could happen,
Right.
and I really want to get this tea time out there. So um, for anyone that's listening now or will watch the replay, just share this tea time. If you know somebody that has lost a child or who's going through this experience right now, I myself lost my daughter 35 years ago, and even to this day, like Michelle, like you said, we live with it every day. So if you have to hear our story for 5-10 minutes or even an hour, you know what, we live with it 365 days every year. Special days and are harder on us. So let's have some empathy for people who are going through this. I do want to get your tea before we wrap up, and we might run a little over the hour, and I really believe that we will, because there's still a lot of things I want to ask you, Michelle. um, but I want to ask you, what is your tea today? What tea would you serve to the listening audience today on your story?
I think I would say truth, education, and advocacy.
Now, you want to share a little bit on those words?
Yeah, truth. Listen, I am fully. I mean, my other word that I was kind of thinking about when you said tea was transparency, but I think they're kind of one and the same in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I tell you my story, right? I will tell you all of it. Um, you know, there are times when I've gotten more graphic into what it's like to go through infertility or what it's like to go through, this and that. Depending on audience and the topic and everything. This I lay it all out for you, right? Like this is my truth. This is my
Yeah.
story. If you're willing to give me a chance to listen, I want to share that because there was so much, and I mean, I felt like I was an educated feminist. I was older and I thought I knew everything. And it turns out I knew like very little. And so that's why I want to share my truth. I always joke that when they told me preeclampsia, the only thing I knew about preeclampsia was an old episode of ER when Dr. Green treats a woman in the ER with preeclampsia and she dies. That was the only thing I knew about preeclampsia.
Wow.
At 21 weeks pregnant, at age 36, right? I should have known more than that. And so I think just really speaking the truth. I think taking some of the, when we talk about, bringing up these topics that are difficult for us, I think we also need to really be honest and to start taking away that like belief of the Cinderella story of like, you find your love and you get pregnant really easily and then you just have a baby. And really be honest about all of that, right? Like, not everybody gets pregnant really easily. Not everyone has a great pregnancy. There are people who, myself included, pregnancy sucked for me in a lot of ways, right? Birth sucks, and that's tough. And then there's all the problems that it can, and that's in a somewhat normal, way. But there's all these other things that can happen, and those are tough, right? And so I think, just being really true and really honest about that is really important. I guess with that is educating, and I guess that's kind of like they're a little bit hand in hand.
Yeah.
It's just being real about these things. One of the things that really was hard for me was when we were in NICU, I just really wish we had known that there was a possibility she could die. In my book, once we made it past like 24, 48 hours, it never occurred to me that she could die. And yes, there was things like, obviously, if she had had a surgery, there's additional risks anytime any of us go under a knife. And so, yes, I understand that. But that's just that she could be in the isolette and then die never occurred to me.
Yeah.
And I really wish I had had some education and some knowledge of that. I think it would have taken away some of the shock wouldn't have helped the grief or anything, but I think it would have helped some of the processing a little bit. Um, and then advocacy. I mean, we need to tell people, share your story, speak out. There is nothing, there is no harm in whatever way, um, I think it's Shirley Chisholm has the quote. Um, and if I misattributed it, I apologize. But it's like, speak even if your voice shakes, right? And that's the thing. Like, I have told this story, countless times, and today I cried, and I think that's largely because yesterday was Colette's angelversary, and I think there's still a lot of emotion. But when I first told I couldn't get through the whole story without breaking down and crying. And I continued telling it, right? And then it became easier and it became easier. And then I have some days like today that it was harder. And I think, kind of doing all of that, is really important. Um, Asking for change and questioning, and my big thing is, questioning status quo. Like, why do we do it this way?
Yeah.
Why do we do it that way? Uh, what more could we be doing? All of those kinds of things I think we all need to be doing. And so that's kind of where I would say was my tea.
And then it's really strong tea, and we really need to get the truth out there, you know. And the truth is, and I really appreciate the transparency, because this is what we need. We need real truth, transparent, you know, when we're telling our stories, and we're going to, you know, um, and maybe because we both have experienced loss, maybe there's that connection as well, uh, for me, this tea time was hard for me, uh, and it was also rewarding
Mm-hmm.
and really enlightening, because I feel that all the babies that have passed early have all joined together, and I have this vision that they're all like, hey, go mama, you got this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for me, I look at my angel daughter Ashley as my go-to for strength, so Michelle, do you do that with Colette?
I do. Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, here's the thing, right? Again, going back to, I'm a mom. I'm a girl mom, right? And
Yeah.
so, yes, Colette's never going to have children, and is never going to go down that world. And I understand that, but I still fight for her. And I fight for my son, who I hope one day has children. And, whatever. And hopefully it's seamless and wonderful and a fairy tale, because I hope everything is for him, right?
Yeah.
And I know it won't be, but I want to improve those things. And that's really what pushes me to do this is my kids. And, I think all of us talk about that, right? We want to create a better world for our children. And I think especially in this realm, unfortunately, we are behind, and we have actually gone backwards some in this area. And I would say significantly so in a lot of
Yep.
ways. And I think we need to keep pushing, and it's exhausting. Don't get me wrong. Like, I mean, when I said in the beginning about having free time and
Yeah.
that being, I'm constantly thinking of this. I'm constantly thinking of things, right? And whether that is, more management of the foundation, whether that is trying to fundraise, also like those big things, like how do we take this on, this huge issue, right?
Yeah.
Um, because that's the bread and butter of it, right? How
Yeah.
are we doing this? And I think if we could answer those questions, if we could really just, start talking those conversations, I mean, maybe that should have been my tea, is talking. Um, you know, Start questioning, start talking. And I think, really doing that. And yeah, so I definitely think, Colette is a source of strength. I think um, I very much feel like, I mean, my joke is, right, I run this foundation of my own, and my joke is that Colette is my boss. So people say, "Oh, you work for yourself. You're your own boss." I'm like, "Well, no, my daughter's my boss." And I really do think that, because this is how I'm parenting her, and this is what I am doing, and I am trying to make a better world, for her,
Yeah.
and for my son, and all of this next generation. Although I keep saying the next generation is going to save us. Um, but I think that's really where I draw my strength from a lot.
Yeah. Well, I find that our children who have passed are our stepping stones and our go getters and our boss, like you said. You
Right,
know, when I'm having a hard time, I feel like this little tap, Mom, come on, you got this.
right,
Let's
exactly.
go. You're not done. A little more, and I'm tired. No, you can do this. We're
Yeah,
pushing. And I like that you said that Colette was your boss because that's how I feel about Ashley too. She's like, oh no, no, we're not doing this. We're, you
right.
know,
No, 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 no.
yeah, we got
You think
things to
you
do.
were allowed to, like, not do something? Yeah,
Yeah, and I love that that you're widening the foundation and that you're always thinking of new things because we have to keep moving and bringing different to the table and bringing that awareness. You also mentioned something a little earlier in the show about collaboration and connecting and working together. I'm
hmm,
big on that. And I feel that if we start collaborating with different organizations, different foundations, different individuals and their stories, we are going to make a change. We are
right.
going to make that difference. We can't do it alone, like you said, Michelle. We need other people. You know, it's not a competition out there. It's joining hands and let's get a change in the world.
Right.
We really got to take that competition word out and just
Yeah.
togetherness. You know,
And that we can learn from each other, right? I
exactly.
learn just as much from any story I hear or any, data I hear from other organizations, from other lost parents. I learn more sometimes from that than anything else I could prepare myself for. And I think that that's really key to remember those kinds of things because that's how we learn, that's how we grow. And yeah, that working together is just, I mean, two heads are better than one, and four are better than two, and on,
Yeah.
all the way through.
So, Michelle, do you have any final words before we wrap up?
I would send some love to both you, Liz, and any other lost parents who might have listened in. And, I mean, I always love to hear about other people's angel babies. So you can always feel free to just contact me and say, like, hey, I wanted to share. This is my angel baby. I do really actually hold those very close. And I do try to remember those individual stories a lot. Um, and I think, if somebody has had a loss and hasn't come forward, I think do it in whatever way you can, right? If you have to do it anonymously because you're not ready to it, if you want to do it very vaguely because you're not ready, like do it in whatever way you can, to whoever you can. And if that is just as simple as calling up one friend and saying, hey, listen, I've never told you this and I need to tell you this. Or the friend who knows and just saying, really want to talk about my child and I want to talk about my story. Do that. And if you know somebody who has lost, give them a hug today, whatever that looks like, right? If it's virtual hug, if it's thinking of you, if you remember their angel baby's name, it means the world when somebody reaches out and shares your baby's name, right? When somebody says, um, thinking of you and Colette today, oh my God, right? The simplest text is the world to a lost parent. And so, do those kinds of things. I mean, that's such a small ripple effect, but that can have such long lasting um, waves.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. And I agree with you. Say their names. We want to
Yeah.
hear their names. We
Hmm.
don't want to hear a baby girl, baby boy. We want to hear their names.
Right.
For the parents who were able to give a name to their child, say their names because it means
Right.
a lot. You
Or
know,
do they have a nickname?
right?
Like Sweet Pea was a nickname. That was how big the baby was at the time, and so that was our nickname at the moment in time when we lost was Sweet Pea, and that's what we referred to him or her. I don't know, as Sweet Pea, and that's our Sweet Pea. If people say that, I love it. It's that kind of thing. So whatever it is that they do, if they have anything like that, just use it.
It's the little things that make a difference. It really
Yeah.
does make the impact. I want to get into really quickly before we wrap up, Michelle. Where can people find you if they need to reach you?
Yeah, so our website is ColetteLouise.com. I see that it's on the screen, but Colette is two T's. And they can reach us there. Contact form. I let's reach them. I'm Michelle with 2 L's at ColetteLouise.com. Feel free to send me an email. And, we're on all the social media platforms, and we would love to connect there, whatever way, works for us. But we have a lot to say, a lot to honor, but we also have a ton to learn. I mean, there's so much we don't know. And so we want to hear from you, and we want to get that feedback. And if you can, or somebody who can, or a company that can, really honestly, our capacity to give is based on the funds we have. And so anything that you can give, I can tell you 100% of every donation goes to families in crisis. We don't use it. We have a donor that specifically pays for any of our overhead. So it's going straight to a family. And it really does make a difference. And talking about little steps, I mean, little things add up. So if you can give, if you can direct me to somebody who can give, whatever it is, I'm always grateful for that as well.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing your story, Michelle, with us this morning. So for anyone who's listening to the show right now or listening to the replay, please let me know where you're tuning in from. Hashtag replay, and let me know where you tuned in from, because I always like to know where you're coming in from. And again, Michelle, thank you for sharing your story. And let's just share this tea time. Share it with a loved one. Share it with someone you know that it might help, and it might just bring them some hope. Because sometimes it's heavy, it's hard, and us sharing our stories will lighten you up a little. So again, I want to thank you, Michelle. I want to thank the listening audience. I want to thank everyone who supports Miss Liz's Tea Times. And again, if you'd like to know more information, check out her website, ColetteLouise.com. Double T, like she said, and a double L for Michelle. So we got doubles going on. There's a mom and a daughter all the way straight through. So again, thank you to Colette for giving you this incredible foundation and saving other people's lives. I will see everybody back at 3 p.m. for a second show today, and then at 7 p.m. for the third show. And we'll see where we're going next at 3 p.m. I'm going to just leave it at that. So if you want to tune in, you can tune in. And then in the evening, if you want to tune in, tune in. Again, Michelle, thank you. Don't leave. We're going to have a few words before we close up in the back. And again, I want to thank everyone for tuning into Tea Time with Miss Liz. We're here to teach, educate, awareness on the tough subjects like today. So again, share this tea time, share it with a loved one, and give someone a hug. You never know who's hurting in silence. So let's bring the awareness, and let's stop the silence, and let's start talking about this loss of children. We need to start talking about our children. And I want to thank Ashley for giving Mommy the courage to do this tea time, because this one was a hard one. But I know Mommy has things to do too. So you're my little boss. So I want to thank Ashley for that. And I want to thank you again, Michelle. And thank you to your husband and your little guy. So until then, I will see everybody at 3 p.m. with a second tea time.